What if I told you there's a diesel engine so powerful, so dominant, that it literally powered America for 3 decades, then got banned? Not because it failed, not because something better came along, but because the world changed around it, and suddenly, being the best wasn't enough anymore. Picture this. It's 1974, and you're standing next to a freshly rebuilt transit bus in downtown Detroit. The driver fires up the engine, and the entire vehicle shakes with a distinctive, rhythmic hammering that sounds like a machine gun wrapped in velvet. Black smoke billows from the exhaust stack, and that unmistakable 2-stroke scream fills the air. Every mechanic within earshot knows exactly what's under that doghouse, a Detroit diesel 8V92, 8 cylinders, 92 cubic inches per cylinder, 2-stroke fury. This is the story of the Detroit diesel 8V92, the screaming, smoke-belching workhorse that became both the most loved and most hated diesel engine in American history. An engine that dominated trucking, transit, marine, and industrial applications for over 30 years. An engine that made 500 horsepower look easy when competitors struggled to break 400. An engine that ultimately got regulated out of existence not because it couldn't perform, but because it performed too well in all the wrong ways by modern standards. To understand why the 8V92 ruled the roads and then got shown the door, we need to travel back to the golden age of Detroit diesel, when General Motors' diesel division was cranking out 2-stroke screamers that nobody else could touch. The year was 1957, and GM had just introduced something revolutionary, the Series 71 engine family. These weren't your grandfather's diesels. While everyone else was building 4-stroke engines that went through intake, compression, power, and exhaust strokes separately, Detroit Diesel said, "Why waste time?" Their 2 strokes combined intake and exhaust into 1 stroke, power and compression into another. Twice as many power strokes per revolution. Pure efficiency, at least in theory. The Series 71 engines, named for their 71 cubic inches per cylinder, were immediate hits. But Detroit Diesel wasn't done. In 1962, they introduced the Series 92, with each cylinder displacing 92 cubic inches. More displacement meant more power, and when they arranged 8 of these cylinders in a V configuration, they created something special. The 8V92 officially launched in 1974, though prototypes had been terrorizing test tracks since 1972. The problem the 8V92 was designed to solve was simple. America needed more power. The interstate highway system was expanding, trucks were getting heavier, cities needed buses that could haul more passengers up steeper hills. Marine operators wanted faster boats that could still carry serious cargo. Everyone wanted more grunt, but nobody wanted bigger engines that wouldn't fit in existing engine bays. Detroit Diesel's solution was brilliant. Squeeze maximum power from minimum space. The 8V92 displaced just 736 cubic inches total. That's 12.06 liters for those keeping track. Sounds big? A contemporary Caterpillar 3406 displaced 14.6 liters. A Cummins KT displaced 19 liters, yet the 8V92 could match or beat them both in certain applications. Here's where it gets interesting. The heart of this beast was pure Detroit diesel DNA, a 2-stroke, roots-blown, direct injection diesel that broke every conventional rule. Let me explain the engineering, because this is where the 8V92 got both its incredible power and its eventual death sentence. In a conventional 4-stroke diesel, the piston goes down on intake, sucking in air. Up on compression, squeezing that air until it's hot enough to ignite fuel. Down on power when fuel gets injected and explodes. Up on exhaust, pushing out the spent gases. 4 movements, 1 power stroke. Simple, reliable, relatively clean. The 8V92 did things differently, way differently. Every downstroke was a power stroke. Every upstroke handled compression and exhaust simultaneously. The magic happened through a Roots-type supercharger, not for making boost like a turbo, but for literally forcing air through the engine. See, two-strokes can't suck in their own air. They need help. The blower pushed fresh air through ports in the cylinder walls, which the piston would uncover at the bottom of its stroke. This fresh air would push out exhaust gases through 4 exhaust valves in the head, while simultaneously filling the cylinder with fresh charge. The compression ratio was 17.1 in naturally aspirated form, 15.1 for turbocharged variants. Those are serious squeeze numbers. The fuel system was pure Detroit, unit injectors that combined the injection pump and nozzle in one unit, mounted right in the cylinder head. Each injector was mechanically operated by the camshaft through a rocker arm, with a control rack managing fuel delivery. Fuel pressure hit 20,000 psi at the nozzle tip. No common rail, no electronics, just mechanical precision that could put fuel exactly where it needed to be, exactly when it needed to be there. The base 8V92 naturally aspirated engine made 318 horsepower at 2100 RPM and 885 pound-feet of torque at 1200 RPM. Respectable, but Detroit wasn't done. Add a turbocharger to the mix, the 8V92T, and power jumped to 360 horses and 1050 pound-feet. Still not satisfied? The 8V92TA added an aftercooler, dropping charge air temperatures and allowing even more fuel. Result, 435 horsepower and 1250 pound-feet. But here's the kicker. Those were the conservative ratings. The marine versions, designated 8V92Ti for turbocharged intercooled, were rated at 500 horsepower at 2300 RPM. Some specialty applications saw 550 or even 600 horsepower from 12 liters. In 1974, the Silver Series, introduced in 1977, pushed things even further. Improved turbochargers, better intercooling, revised injector timing. The 8V92 Silver could sustain 475 horsepower all day long in over-the-road applications. City Transit loved the Silver Series. Los Angeles alone bought over 2,000 buses powered by 8V92 Silvers between 1978 and 1985. Let's talk about that distinctive sound, because if you've ever heard an 8V92 at full chat, you never forget it. The exhaust note was unlike anything else on the road. At idle, it produced a characteristic loping rhythm. Potato, 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 from the uneven firing intervals inherent to a 90-degree V8 two-stroke. Under acceleration, it transformed into a shriek that could be heard from miles away. Bus drivers called it turning up the volume. Truckers called it winding out the jimmy. Everyone else called it loud. The Roots blower added its own symphony, a high-pitched whine that increased with engine speed. At full throttle, the combination of blower scream, turbo whistle, and exhaust howl created a cacophony that announced your presence long before you arrived. Some cities actually created noise ordinances specifically targeting Detroit two-strokes. Portland, Oregon, banned them from certain residential routes after 10 p.m. Performance-wise, the 8V92 was a contradiction. It made huge power for its size, but was catastrophically inefficient by modern standards. Fuel consumption? Forget about it. A well-tuned 8V92TA in a highway truck might return 4.5 miles per gallon. A comparable Caterpillar 3406B would get 6 mpg doing the same work. That's a 33% penalty just for the privilege of running a two-stroke. But fuel was just part of the problem. The real killer was emissions. Remember how I said every downstroke was a power stroke? That means the 8V92 was firing twice as often as a four-stroke. More combustion events meant more opportunities to create pollution. And boy, did it create pollution. The exhaust scavenging process was inherently dirty. When those exhaust ports opened, combustion was still happening. Unburned fuel and partially combusted hydrocarbons escaped straight into the atmosphere. At idle, an 8V92 produced visible blue-white smoke from oil mist carried out with the exhaust. Under load, black particulate smoke poured from the stack. Detroit Diesel tried everything: different ring packages, modified port timing, improved injectors. nothing really worked. The numbers were damning. A 1982 EPA study found the 8V92TA produced 18.5 grams of NOx per brake horsepower hour. The competing Cummins L10 produced 6.8 grams. Particulate emissions were even worse, 0.65 grams per bhp/hr versus 0.25 for the Cummins. The 8V92 was producing nearly 3 times the NOx and over twice the particulates of its four-stroke competition. City transit authorities started catching heat in the early 1980s. Environmental groups filmed buses belching black smoke at every stop. Parents complained about children breathing diesel fumes at bus stops. The writing was on the wall. Detroit Diesel fought back with the Series 92 DDEC, Detroit Diesel Electronic Control. Introduced in 1985, it was one of the first fully electronic diesel control systems. Electronic unit injectors replaced the mechanical versions. A computer managed injection timing and duration. Sensors monitored everything from coolant temperature to throttle position. It was revolutionary for its time. DDEC helped. The 8V92 DDEC produced 11.2 grams of NOx per bhp/hr. Still bad, but better. Particulates dropped to 0.45 grams. Fuel economy improved by about 8%. But it wasn't enough. The EPA was tightening the screws and two-stroke technology simply couldn't keep up. The 1988 EPA regulations were survivable. Barely. Detroit managed to squeak the 8V92 through with extensive modifications, improved turbochargers with wastegates, revised compression ratios, different cam profiles, anything to reduce emissions while maintaining power. But the 1991 regulations were the death blow. The EPA demanded NOx levels below 5.0 grams per bhp/hr, particulates under 0.25 grams. The 8V92, even with all the electronic wizardry Detroit could muster, couldn't get there. The chemistry of two-stroke combustion made it impossible. You can't have exhaust and intake happening simultaneously without mixing some fresh air and fuel with the exhaust stream. The irony is that the 8V92 was at the peak of its development when it died. The final versions, produced between 1989 and 1995, were magnificent machines. The 8V92TA DDEC-IV made 500 honest horsepower and could do it reliably for 500,000 miles between overhauls. Detroit had solved the reliability issues that plagued early electronic versions. They'd improved the head gasket design that used to fail every 200,000 miles. They'd fixed the liner seal problems that caused coolant contamination. Marine operators who weren't subject to the same EPA regulations kept buying 8V92s right up until the end. Why? Because nothing else provided that combination of power, size, and weight. A pair of 8V92TIs could push a 65-foot yacht to 28 knots. Try that with naturally aspirated four strokes of the same displacement. The military loved them too. The LAV-25 armored vehicle used an 8V92TA right up until 2000. The power-to-weight ratio was unmatched, 275 horsepower from an engine package that weighed just 2,450 pounds complete. The turbocharged four-stroke that replaced it weighed 3,100 pounds and made the same power. But civilian applications, dead. The last over-the-road truck with an 8V92 rolled off the line in 1994, the last transit bus in 1995. By 1996, the only place you could buy a new 8V92 was for marine or industrial applications. Even then, Detroit was pushing customers toward the Series 60, their new four-stroke engine that could meet any emissions regulation thrown at it. The demise of the 8V92 marked the end of an era, not just for Detroit diesel, but for two-stroke diesels in general. EMD continued building two-stroke locomotive engines, but those operate under different regulations. For highway and transit use, the two-stroke diesel was extinct. The 8V92's legacy is complicated. In pure performance terms, it was one of the greatest diesel engines ever built. Power density? Unmatched. Throttle response? Instantaneous. Ability to rev? It would spin to 2,800 RPM when most diesels were governed at 2,100. Rebuildability? With basic hand tools, a competent mechanic could rebuild an 8V92 in a weekend. Try that with a modern common rail diesel. But it was also an environmental disaster. Every 8V92 that stayed on the road probably produced as much pollution as 3 modern diesels. The fuel consumption penalty meant burning more petroleum to do the same work. The noise pollution was real. Studies linked Detroit two-stroke bus routes to increased stress levels in urban populations. Yet talk to anyone who operated an 8V92 in its prime, and their eyes light up. Bus drivers talk about the instant power for pulling away from stops. Truckers remember passing governed 4 strokes on mountain grades. Marine operators still swear nothing matches the throttle response of a good 8V92. The collectors have taken notice. A running 8V92 TA in good condition now sells for $15,000 to $20,000. That's more than they cost new, adjusted for inflation. Specialized rebuilders like Johnson & Towers in Florida have waiting lists for rebuilt 8V92s. They go into vintage coaches, classic boats, pulling trucks. Applications where emissions regulations don't apply or can be worked around. There's even a thriving hot rod scene. People are putting 8V92s in things they were never intended for. I've seen a rat rod with an 8V92 where the hood should be. There's a guy in Texas with an 8V92 powered Peterbilt that runs 10s in the quarter mile. The pulling truck guys love them because two-stroke power delivery is perfect for maintaining wheel speed in the dirt. Modern diesel technology has obviously surpassed the 8V92 in every measurable way. A 2024 Detroit DD13 makes 525 horsepower from 12.8 liters while meeting Euro 6 emission standards. It'll return 7 at 8 mpg in a heavy truck. It'll run 1 million miles between overhauls. It's superior in every objective measure, but it doesn't scream. It doesn't shake the ground at idle. It doesn't announce its presence with authority. It's a tool, efficient and reliable, but ultimately forgettable. The 8V92 was an experience. Raw, visceral, unapologetic, it represented an era when engineers solved problems with mechanical genius instead of electronic band-aids. When diesel engines had personality instead of just specifications. The death of the 8V92 wasn't really about one engine. It was about the transition from mechanical to electronic, from simple to complex, from dirty to clean. It marked the moment when environmental concerns finally outweighed pure performance. The moment when society decided that making power wasn't enough, you had to make it responsibly. Detroit Diesel saw it coming. They spent the 1980s developing the Series 60, a 4-stroke that could meet any emissions regulation, while still making competitive power. When it launched in 1987, everyone knew it was the 8V92's replacement, even if Detroit wouldn't admit it publicly. By 1993, the Series 60 was Detroit's best seller. The 8V92 was yesterday's news. Today, the EPA regulations that killed the 8V92 look lenient. Modern Tier 4. Final emission standards require diesel particulate filters, selective catalytic reduction, exhaust gas recirculation, and a chemistry set's worth of aftertreatment. NOx levels that seemed impossible in 1991 are now 10 times higher than current limits. The 8V92 wouldn't just fail modern emissions tests, it would break the testing equipment. But here's the thing about legends. They don't need to be perfect to be remembered. The 8V92 earned its place in diesel history not by being clean or quiet or efficient, but by being absolutely dominant when those things didn't matter. It powered America through 3 decades of growth. It moved millions of people, thousands of tons of freight, and countless boats through endless waters. The engineers who designed it were solving 1970s problems with 1960s technology, pushed to absolute limits. They created something that shouldn't have worked as well as it did. A 2-stroke diesel that could compete with 4 strokes twice its size. An engine that made 40 horsepower per liter when 25 was considered excellent. A mechanical masterpiece that just happened to be born at the wrong time for its particular talents. In the end, the 8V92 was banned, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well at the wrong things. It was the ultimate expression of raw diesel power in an era that was moving toward refined efficiency. It was a sledgehammer in a world increasingly requiring scalpels. It was glorious, terrible, and absolutely unforgettable. The last 8V92 rolled off the assembly line in 1995. Detroit Diesel merged with MTU in 2000, then became part of Daimler. The Redford plant, where 8V92s were built, is gone, demolished for condos. The engineers who designed it are retired or deceased. But somewhere right now, probably within a mile of where you're sitting, an old bus or boat or generator is firing up an 8V92. That distinctive idol is loping through the air. Black smoke is curling from an exhaust stack. And for just a moment, it's 1978 again. Diesel fuel is cheap, nobody's heard of climate change, and the loudest, proudest, most obnoxious diesel engine ever mass-produced is doing what it does best, turning dinosaurs into noise and horsepower with absolutely zero apologies. What's the most memorable engine sound you've ever heard? Drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever experienced the scream of a Detroit two-stroke in person. If you enjoyed this deep dive into diesel history, hit that subscribe button for more stories about the engines that built and broke America. Until then, keep those engines running, whatever they're burning, however they're breathing.